Let's see. I'm gonna go into the chat, see if I can find the chat for this event. And pre-live. We're on the pre-live. Let's see how it is. John, are you seeing our stream?
On LinkedIn, say?
Yeah.
Let me check.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
All right, because on this system, it's not letting me check the stream. You can also just...
I see it.
You see it? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's give a couple of minutes for people to join. There is a chat that I'm monitoring here. Let's see if we... yeah. Let me check on my end if I can... Do you see the chat, John, on LinkedIn side?
Is this Xue, X-U-E? I see the stream, she says. Welcome.
Yeah.
Here I'm looking on the Restream UI, not the LinkedIn UI, but I can see the message from LinkedIn.
Ah, very cool. So for a little bit of context, it is my first time using Restream, and I just noticed that you can actually see the comments here. It's great. It's bi-directional communication. Yeah. We were just doing the pre-call call, right, John?
Yes, it went really well. We got to, let's see, what did we do? We did a little bit of discussion on LeetCode and AI, some things like that.
Yeah, and we brainstormed some ideas for next time, which include, for those of you joining in early, includes some strategies and tools that you can use to create content quickly, streaming and content creation, which is part of this job search in 2024. I think having a personal brand is really important. So we want to cover how busy professionals like ourselves can create content parallel to our work, if at all possible.
I'm totally aligned with you on that. Let me add a data point. Hopefully I'll be able to sprinkle in a bunch of data here. I was laid off in May, and then I obtained a new job within 2 months. I got my first offer within a month. I got an offer that I liked within 2 months. In the course of that job search, 50% of my interview requests were inbound. And they were inbound due to that personal brand, just like you speak of. So having a LinkedIn profile that looks good, I'm sure we'll get into all this stuff, but there's real data that goes behind this intuition that you have.
Yeah, I think the first time I noticed this importance of a personal brand for myself personally was in 2021, when a CEO, non-technical CEO, I might add, read one of my articles and was impressed and put me in contact with the CTO, and then the ball got rolling from there. So definitely, if you have the time, I think personal brand is something you should invest into.
LinkedIn also provides a data point on this, LinkedIn themselves. And I think the lift is relatively low. I would advise you to do more than this, but I think they say that candidates who post 4 times per week see significantly more interview requests.
Yeah, so this is kind of the pre-call call in this live session. So if we were to say those 4 times once a day, I would do Monday to Thursday, because on Friday, traffic drops off precipitously.
True.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's interesting. Speaking of LinkedIn traffic, I find different parts of LinkedIn get traffic differently. Like if you go to the job seeking side of LinkedIn, in fact, traffic ramps up Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So it depends on where you're looking too.
Interesting. I don't know that I've noticed that. Okay. Yeah, cool. It makes sense, right? So I would think my intuition for why traffic drops off over the weekend is that people are not at their desk and they are out and about around town, going out for dinner, seeing family. But it would make sense that if an individual was on the job market, they would be taking all the time they can to continue to search for a job, even on the weekend. That's what I did. Now, I will say that I do think it's critical that you still rest get adequate rest during your job search. But I am of the mind that you can get adequate rest if you take one day off a week. So this will vary by person, but personally, when I was on the job search and I was able to get these quick results, part of that is because I hit the gas pedal. Like, I'm not one of these people who was laid off and then took 6 months of a break. I approached the next week, I was working 6 days a week, 10 to 12 hours a day.
Yeah, and I think this is a great segue into our first topic. So I think our live's now getting serious, everybody. So grab your beverage of choice now, because we're going to go in semi-rapid fire. We're going to go through some of the problems, some of the most common problems that job seekers experience in this job market. Okay, so John, the first question I'd like to talk about is the typical case for either new grads, people who have been laid off recently, or those maybe trying to pivot. I'm not getting traction in the job market. So, John, here's my problem. I'm sending applications, a lot of cold applications. I'm spending, just like you, I'm doing 6 days a week. I'm doing 30, 40 applications a day, but I'm not getting traction. I'm not booking those interviews. People aren't reaching out back. What do?
I love it. I love it. There's so many things wrong with this scenario already. The first will be, if you are spending 6 days a week applying to jobs, why is your volume at the rate of 30 applications per week? So it's taking you all day to send 5 applications. Something is wrong here. We should be able to leverage tools like the LinkedIn Easy Apply. There's also an AI tool that I'll call out, Use Massive, which will allow you to apply to 100 places. Like, you can apply to 5 places in 1 minute when you use some of these tools. So the entry, like early career folks, I'll talk about them first. And then you did talk about someone who's laid off. The level will matter. So that senior folks will be doing less applications per week. So I'll start with the early career folks, and then we'll adjust for the late career folks. But for the early career folks, you should be doing 80 to 100 applications per week. 80 to 100. You should be doing this with social follow-up. Every company to which you apply, you should be maintaining a spreadsheet with the original job post, the title of that job post, and a contact, ideally like a LinkedIn URL or something like that. Why do we want to do 80 to 100? So that we can A/B test our messaging. So if you are doing a cold application, probably you didn't socially network with someone, right? So that's going to be a huge mistake. So we want to message someone, and we also want to track what message we sent them. And if you do this 80 to 100 times per week, now you can get a statistical signal on what messaging is working better than what, better than others. So we can get into some of that concrete messaging. I have a bunch of tips for that, but basically you will be doing much better if you do the following 3 things relative to your scenario. One is, make sure that you socially outreach to every company that you apply. I like to allocate a 3-day waiting period where I'm trying to get a referral before I go submit the resume. 2 is up your volume. So you should be doing 80 to 100 if you're a junior. By the time you're a senior, you can cut that number in half. And then it will decrease even further after you start racking up interviews, and the interviews are taking a bunch of your time. So in my recent job search, I did do 40 to 50 applications, probably for 2 weeks, and then I started getting interviews. And so it goes down as you're allocating time to prepare for the interview.
Yeah. So a few things here, right, to unpack is first, in the original question, I said 30 a day, by the way, but it's a good point.
Okay.
It's a good point you mentioned. We need to have some critical volume, right? You need to be doing a decent amount of applications. Now, the quality of the application matters as well, which you touched on, right, John? You got to make sure you apply and then go add some people on LinkedIn. I'm big on actionable tips. So something I do personally is I'll apply and then instantly, and by the way, I'm really, really lazy when it comes to this. I'll line up a few jobs, I'll apply to all of them, and then I'll make a list of companies, people to go like make contacts with. So If I applied for 5 jobs this morning, you best believe I got those 5 company names. I'm going to be doing research. I'm going to figure out who the top decision makers are. I'm going to figure out who my potential peers could be. And then I'm just adding them on LinkedIn, right? And another thing I want to quickly touch on is you can create multiple LinkedIn accounts completely, right? Depending on where you are in your career, you might need to create a strong IC, like an individual contributor profile, as well as perhaps a more leadership-oriented, more consultant or more like manager-oriented profile, right? So also create multiple profiles. I think that's one of the things. Okay, you mentioned, John, there were in your latest job search, you got a lot of inbound in the first short while. Could we talk about some of the strategies we can implement to increase this number of inbound inquiries we get?
Yeah, absolutely. So I consider LinkedIn Premium essential, and LinkedIn Premium will allow you to send more connection requests, and you also get access to the InMails, which LinkedIn themselves will tell you that it has a much better success rate. And so the main way to grow your network in a hurry is to send a lot of connection requests. So we talked about social networking at every company to which you apply. I would like to clarify that you should not be sending one connection request for that company, right? So a couple pieces of advice that I give here. One is that you can punch up, down, and sideways. And what I mean by this is you can seek a referral from a peer at your level, from someone relatively junior to you, and from someone relatively senior to you. You can add all of the above. And they each have their pros and cons. You'll speak to them each slightly different way. But trying to diversify is going to improve your overall success rate. And then sometimes I'll get a pushback like the following. Let's say that you reach out and you connect with someone at this company and you say, hey, I'm looking at 2 different roles. They both look interesting to me. I'd like to get your thoughts about which is a better fit for me. And you send this to Jim and Sarah. Same message you send to Jim and Sarah. You're very lucky because in this case, Jim and Sarah both agreed to speak with you and they both give you some advice. But the problem is Jim says A, Sarah says B. What do you do? Well, there's a couple things you can do. You can get a third opinion, of course, break the tie. But the pushback that I get is, John, am I sort of like betraying their trust by not going with what they recommended? And the answer is no. If you ask me and I give you my opinion, I would encourage you to get more opinions. So don't feel bad about connecting with multiple people at the same company and getting different opinions at the same company. Even the people working at that company, if you just directly ask them, they'll tell you like, yeah, I encourage you to do this. I think those would be some of the bits about how to grow your network rapidly, as well as you want to post consistently. Early in the stream, we mentioned that LinkedIn says if you post 4 times a week, you do significantly better. I would encourage you to be doing better than that. The mental model that I have for this is each of the tasks that you do in your job search, you need to do a meaningful amount every day. And so I would allocate 1 hour per day as a starting point of engaging with social communities, whether that's on LinkedIn, on Discord, on Twitter. I would spend an hour a day. And I don't know about you, but in an hour, I can post a whole bunch more than 4 times. Then you can spend that number up or down depending on the return you're seeing from that time. So the hour a day thing is just like a starting point, which says, if you didn't work on practicing code for an hour, did you really even try that hard? It's just a threshold that you're doing something meaningful. You can tweak it for your own results. And the other thing that I would call out when I'm trying to make social connections, LinkedIn treats you differently before and after you reach the 500 connection mark, right? Once you go over this 500 connection mark, then your profile just says like 500 plus connections. And so you will actually do substantially better in the job market if you can go over that number.
Yeah. The call out here is it's a multi-pronged approach. There's the time boxing, which is you tell yourself, just as John said, 25 minutes, maybe an hour, however long a day, and you set up a baseline for yourself. So when I first started applying for jobs, and I've gone through multiple seasons of doing this, the very first season, it would probably take me about 25 minutes to apply for a job. And your mileage may vary, right? So now, today, it takes me about 2 to 5 minutes. just because I've practiced and I've put together a process, whatever that may be. It's going to be different for everybody, but I have a process for quickly tailoring resumes and just applying. So whenever a job posting comes up, or like when I'm looking at jobs, I always filter by newest. This is something that everyone should typically be doing, is filter by newest and apply for the ones that haven't been reposted. Those are typically the ones where there's some urgency in hiring. Okay. So if we're not getting traction, just to recap very quickly what we talked about in case you missed it, is there's two ways to do it. First is you want to optimize for outbound. Like John was saying before, you want to have some critical number of applications that go out per week. You want to optimize for inbound as well. So how can people find you? How can people who are looking for, say, a JavaScript developer, how can they stumble across your profile and then see something that makes you stand out from the competition? So a few things that can help you here is side projects. So anything you find interesting, any hobbies you may have, hockey, fantasy league, whatever it is, having some side projects that you can talk about. The second is having a portfolio, a personal brand, and thought leadership. So thought leadership is anything and everything to do with your industry. So anything as small as, hey, I created this code repository, or I created this image using CSS, post about it. You know, it's stuff that show off your talent. Okay, so we got that first question. I hope that it's clear, and I'd love any questions if you have on with regards to, I'm not getting enough traction in the market, what can be done. If you have any perspective, please feel free to drop it in the comments there. So shall we move on from that, John?
Sure. Let's see. What did you want to talk about next? You hinted at the resume, which I think is an interesting spot.
Let's do that. Yeah, let's talk about resumes. Yeah, let's talk about resumes, because here what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to put together some kind of solid framework for landing interviews. For someone who's jumping in, yeah, let's talk about resumes.
Good. Yeah. So the Laterally.io is, you know, an open source website that I maintain, and there's lots of good information on the website, including if you sign up free, there's a checklist that walks you step by step. So when Don and I talk about repeatable frameworks with predictable results, there's like really concrete frameworks, and hopefully we're communicating them properly. But if you miss any details, you can just go check the websites. It's thoroughly documented. And so Laterally's basic advice is you should learn to code, and then you should learn the job search skills as a completely distinct skill set. And one of the pitfalls that I see is that individuals will do a great job at coding, and then they will expect a job to fall in their lap. And this isn't how it works. You need to be proactive and intentional about how you approach obtaining interviews, passing those interviews, negotiating offers, and then onboarding even after you get the job, right? And when you are trying to get interviews, we've talked about social networking, which is really critical, but the resume is another one of these foundational things. Besides the profile, I think we talked about this a little bit, and let's talk about it some more. So I recommend that you treat your resume and your profile as an SEO game. So you want to put keywords in there that when recruiters are searching in the LinkedIn Recruiter UI, you may not know this, they get like a special view on LinkedIn and on other sites, Indeed.com and whatnot. When they are searching, they're often searching for skill keywords. And so you want to make sure that you're using the right ones. I'll give you a common example is full stack engineer, right? Well, there's a number of ways that this is written. Full stack as one word, full stack with a dash, full stack with 2 words. Which is the right one for your resume? You should answer this as an SEO game. So you can go to Google Trends and you can search all the varieties. And it varies a little by country, but the trends, and you can just look in the past 12 months. So don't look on the past week. There may not be enough data points to give you a clear answer. I like to go 6 to 12 months in my country, and you'll get a very clear trend line. Okay, this is the version I should have on my resume. The other thing you want to do is you want to pass an ATS checker. There's a free one at Indeed.com. They have a free ATS scan. If you work with a recruiter may be able to scan yours with their ATS. There are many ATSs. There's not one magical ATS. There's a variety of these. But if you are doing a good job according to the Indeed one, then that puts you in a category where I can now say something about some data analysis that I've done. So two things are true. On the one hand, according to data that I have, and this is documented on Latterly, let's see, which blog article is that? Blog article number 15 on cover letters. Basically, I show that if your resume is good, then cover letters don't matter much. That's basically what I show. If your resume is good and you're social networking. Now, if your resume is not very good, or if you're not doing social networking, then a cover letter might separate you. But if you're doing these two other things, then the cover letter doesn't add much value relative to the time that it takes. So what does it mean for your resume to be relatively good? It means free of grammatical errors, including those skill keywords, and passing the ATS, according to the Indeed.com ATS. If you do those three things, then you may not need to spend time on the cover letter. I'll pause there.
Yeah, so that's very important, right? You got to make sure your resume is ATS compliant. And one of the benefits of making it ATS compliant is that you're going to find that when you optimize for the ATS and you actually attach your resume, you may see some better autocomplete in the forms. So from a technical perspective, it's worth doing. And shout out to the Indeed ATS checker. Now, another thing that I see people doing a lot is making their resume needlessly dense. Do not make it needlessly dense. It needs to pass the 6-second recruiter glance. And I would love to give this person credit, but essentially a creator, I don't remember their name, a creator went ahead and created a FANG resume that included clearly wrong things and hiring red flags. And this person was still able to get traction within the job market because it was optimized for the recruiter glance. So it would say something like increased venereal disease by 60% within the team. So I hope we don't get flagged for that word, but essentially it's stuff like that. So the bottom line is the actionable thing you can do is for each job, write less than 3 bullet points, 3 being the maximum, and optimize for big picture business impacts instead of saying something like use TypeScript and CDK to deploy web application for e-commerce brand. Instead of saying that, say using full stack TypeScript deployed e-commerce store for serving $10 million per year in annual recurring revenue and serving 100,000 clients in the dairy space. I don't know, I'm making this up from thin air, but essentially you want to optimize for that 6-second recruiter glance. And part of this is ordering the resume correctly, right? So if you have experience, you want experience first before education. Things like that.
Was it One Salting? Does that ring a bell?
Yes.
Who did this experiment? Yeah, they're great. And they inject a bit of humor into their content, which I love. Yeah, totally aligned with what Don has just said here. I'll pretty much echo that with some kind of like highlights from my own perspective. If you are having a hard time including skill keywords, maybe you don't have any experience where you can say that you used TypeScript, you can add a project. Some people will push back and have a concern that projects are not very valuable. And maybe they would hypothesize that certifications are really valuable, so that having a skill certification for HTML is better than using HTML in a project. I actually ran a survey among employers on this, and it turns out most employers would rather see it in a project. So don't feel bad about spinning up some people will view it as cheating. Some job seekers will say, I just made this project last week. Is it cheating to claim that I have the skill? My friend, it's not cheating. Do it. Do it. Another thing that you want to avoid is calling yourself junior. Do not restrict yourself to searching for junior software engineer posts. Do not include the word junior on your resume. If you have built software, you have a portfolio, which you should do before you start the job search. So Latterly is going to recommend you get a portfolio, then you put it on your resume, then you start your job search. By the time you've built software, you are a software developer. By the time you've built software, you are a software engineer. By the time you've built websites, you are a web developer. You can look for all of these job titles and more. There's like a dozen job titles that you can be seeking if you qualify for the full stack. Smart metrics in your bullet points for each portfolio item or work experience item. This is really smart of Don to call this out. One thing that I'll highlight here is try to think from the employer perspective. you have the option for every smart metric, every measurable data point, you have an option of a level number or a percentage number. And try to put yourself in the shoes of the employer. What will be considered more impressive? So at your company, maybe you grew the client count by 3, but maybe this is a small company, so that growing it by 3 is actually a 100% growth. What do you think is going to sound better to the person reviewing your resume at Facebook? 3 means nothing to them. 3 is like, I did nothing. But 100% growth, whoa, if I do that at Facebook, this is amazing. This is like, no one has ever done this. And I
framing it, right, John?
Framing it.
It's thinking about less proprietary to your company, more general to the rest of the industry.
And then one last thing is on this length of the resume question. So I've been a software engineer for more than 10 years. I also have a PhD, so I have publications that I could list. This makes your resume really long. And in my case, I A/B tested using a 1-page form of the resume where I left off the PhD works in a 2-page form, and they did not perform differently. There was no difference. So that even someone with my background using a 1-page thing is totally fine. So if you are a junior pushing 2 or 3 pages, probably don't do that.
Yeah, and one call out there is, so this is for someone who's got some experience. One of the call outs is you don't want your history to go back more than 10, 15 years. And depending on the job you're applying for, I myself find that I will be eliminating some of the positions from reality, right? Eliminating from reality in the sense, eliminating them from the resume and taking them just out of that context. So yeah, the takeaway here is shorter is likely better.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about resumes. On the idea of traction, I would like to move a little forward. I'm sure we might get some questions coming in about how can I get more traction, but I think we covered some good ground. Some of the things that we didn't really cover was how to put together a portfolio, like what's the most impactful way to do that, what kind of personal brand, like what kind of strategies, how do you like get started with thought leadership, things like that, which I'm sure we can circle back to. But I want to get to the next level, which is I'm getting interviews, but not offers.
Mm-hmm.
So picture this. You've applied, you've landed, say, 3 to 5 interviews per week, okay? And you're going through the interview process, but not getting very far in each of the discrete interview loops per company. What should we do?
I love this question. Actually, this is the first thing that you should be thinking about. You shouldn't have to wait until you start failing interviews to ask this question. The first question that you should ask is, what is my ideal timeline for this job search? This will heavily influence your strategy. So the laterally typical advice is that you'll use the snowball method, starting with tier 3 companies. Then that will help prepare you and set a insurance bar and a bargaining power bar so that you can approach tier 2 companies and finally tier 1 companies. This would be the typical advice. This is targeted at a job search of around 2 to 4 months. 2 to 4 months. 2 is actually pretty difficult if you do this thoroughly with preparing for technical rounds. You do a time box preparation for technical rounds where you're not even interviewing of 2 to 4 weeks. So probably you're looking at 3 or 4 months. If that's cool with you, great. If you need a job faster than that, then this will alter your strategies. Basically, you will focus more on tier 3. And tier 3 companies interview differently, right? So we know that tier 1 companies are going to emphasize leak code. Tier 3 companies may emphasize projects or other things like this. And so basically, you want to develop your interviewing skills. And your interviewing skills will vary a little bit depending on which companies that you're targeting. You can always ask the recruiter. Any good company will give you tips about their particular rounds, but there are some very common round types. And these are going to be the coding round, the behavioral round, and the system design round. Depending on your level, if you're a very early career, you may not have a system design round at all.
Yeah, I think this is a good point to take a break in the sense, to unpack some of this stuff. I love the snowball method. because for multiple reasons, right? So for those, just to clarify, tier 3 would be like non-FANG. Tier 3 would be like your local banks, your whatever stores, whatever organizations where software might not be the direct end product that they sell. So it could be software adjacent, right? So tier 3, great example of this would be a company like, say, Morningstar, where their direct business is in finance, and software is just a way for them to do more finance. A tier 2, what would you define a tier 2 as, John?
So my typical mental model is that tier 1 is FANG and FANG adjacent companies. We also sometimes call this big N. And how can you identify these people? A good way is by looking at compensation bands on level.fyi, so that if a company is in the FANG acronym, they're in the club. If a company is not in the acronym, but they pay competitively with, and they could potentially beat an offer from Google or Meta, they're probably going to qualify for the club. Tier 2, I consider this to be well-known companies that are not primarily tech companies. And so a good one I like to point out here is Walmart. Everyone knows who Walmart is. It's a household name company, but it's not really a tech company. And then tier 3, different people have different concepts of tier 3. For me, it's just not a household name. So this could be like, if your buddy starts an agency, it doesn't mean that it's a bad company. It's just not a well-known company.
Right. So in very short, tier 1 would be your Silicon Valley, your FANG companies, so to speak. Tier 2 would be your well-known Fortune 500, your household name companies. And tier 3 will be the startups and the lesser known entities, right?
Yeah, and startups are a special category, because you're right that they're typically, their name is not broadly known, but some of them have a quite high bar for engineering quality, and some of them can pay rather well. So startups are a bit unique there, but I typically would not say that they're tier 1. They may be blurry tier 2 or 3. Yeah.
Good. Okay, great. So the snowball method is essentially preparing on these like lesser known companies, like preparing by interviewing with these companies that you can essentially land interviews quite easily with, and interview loops that are not so long. And one of the things with your typical algorithms based or your FANG loop is that it's like 6 to 8 rounds, right? So for you to get to the point where you will experience success, it's best to start somewhere. And what we recommend is start with the tier 3 and then snowball to the tier 1, right?
Yeah, let me add one more note here. If you can afford it, a lot of this is going to depend on your personal financial situation. When I was laid off in May, the first thing that I did is I asked this question: what is my target timeline? And to answer that, I had to understand my own budget and my own runway savings in the bank and so forth, and the opportunity cost of my time. These are all deeply personal things that are going to vary widely by individuals. But I decided that being unemployed is extremely expensive for me. So I'd rather get a job somewhere. And then if I want to go work at FANG, then I'll do that in a second step. And this is a great idea for many, many people, that if you fail your FANG interview, you might just pursue this over a number of years. The best interviewers for LeetCode style interviews only pass about 50% of the time. So that most of the engineers that work at FANG, if they interviewed right now, they would fail their own loop. This is like, you can ask your buddy who works at Microsoft. This is like rather well known.
Yeah.
And so persistence is going to be key. And so there is a wrong thing to do here. The wrong thing to do is fail your loop and not get a job for another year until your cooldown expires. You need to be working somewhere. The opportunity cost is outrageous. I would even encourage you, if your finances allow, to consider taking a salary cut relative to your last role. Supply and demand economics. By lowering the pay requirement, you're going to increase the number of qualified jobs. So to the start of this snowball, consider taking a pay cut and consider working with a third-party agency recruiter, like a Tech Systems, Apex, and so forth. They often have warm relationships with hiring entities. And to Don's point about having a quick loop, I have seen one loop pipelines where if you pass one interview, they'll give you an offer. These are not the best offers in the world, but getting that bar in place, it does not only benefits your negotiation, but it does wonders for things like anxiety which are going to be really crucial when you're on the job search, particularly if you're unemployed.
Yeah. And I actually want to drive that point home. So the Mercor, Tech Systems, what was the other thing of the world?
Apex Systems is another one that I've worked with. They were pretty good.
Yeah. So these staffing companies, I think, are a great example of ways in which you can, as John mentioned, and I think I've experienced this as well, is you have access to some of these well-known names that they have relationships with, and there are specific projects that you could be part of, and you will be paid hourly, and that's a great way of just booking more interviews and getting that practice. Because at the end of the day, this is all about practice, about how comfortable you are with telling your story in a compelling way, and how comfortable you are with solving problems that were just presented to you a couple of minutes ago. So yeah, this is getting interviews but not offers. One of the things I would like to add here is if you are in this process where you're going interview after interview, there is a way to speed up timelines by saying, hey, like, I'm looking for the next position to call home, and I'm in the process with a few other companies. So applying some of this time pressure could be a strategy. But I want to say one thing here is that if you actually don't have this leverage, it's best you not do it. Because I've seen in the past where sometimes when you say, oh, I have competing offers, employers, they get emotional and they kind of like distance themselves with you. So it really depends on the situation. And there's a new tip that I've noticed, and I'm not sure, John, if you've tried this, is you can turn interviews into paid development projects. So what do I mean by this? You can go into a loop and say, I'm looking for a full-time role, but I don't know like what to pick. I've gotten some offers, and these companies are, you can say, right, you can you can feel free to make up, but essentially you can say, I would love an opportunity to work with you to understand like what the work is like, and you can pay me hourly. I've seen some instances where especially companies where if you're dealing directly with the CEO or the CTO at these startups, they would say, you know what, that is actually a good idea, because we have this isolated problem that, you know, we can give to you, pay you hourly, and then if that goes well, we'll make you full time. Is that something, John, that you think maybe is that too niche? Do you feel that being a thing?
I've done something similar to this, which is that I've taken on hourly projects during my job search. And I think I've approached it slightly differently, and that for me, these were essentially always side gigs, and they were never really going to replace the main thing, but they're still a powerful tool to help extend your runway, right? So that if you're making, you know, X number of dollars per hour and you can pay the bills, basically, maybe it's fine to have a longer job search to find that better job, rather than taking a job now, waiting a year and going through an interview process again. Yeah, I think it's an interesting technique, Don, and I'd be curious to see more data on how well it works. I'll be suspicious that this is going to work better for more senior folks, where, yeah, if we're talking to a CEO, we have a proven track record and there's a level of trust there. I am skeptical that this would be an effective early career move, but maybe it would. I don't know.
Yeah, and provided, yes, my experience has been in the mid game. So this is not something that I've done in the early game.
Let me add one other note, and this is, so we're talking about how to get better at your interviews, and just to make explicit what I sort of implied earlier, the best way to improve your next interview performance is by having an interview now. And this is what the snowball method does. You prepare for tier 1 with these tier 2 and tier 3. So the best kind of practice interview is an actual interview. But there is a category of practice interviews, and I think it's worth name dropping a few powerful tools there. Interviewing.io is a tool that I've used. I used this to get an offer from Google years ago. So you can have a practice interview with an actual FANG engineer. They're quite pricey. So some of these tools will be expensive if you want the best. So earlier we talked about accommodations to individuals who are under a financial constraint. Highly understandable if you're unemployed. Other individuals are currently employed and passively seeking a job. And there are top of market tools that they can use to prepare for these tier one FANG interviews. Interviewing.io is such a tool. Hello Interview is another tool. In my experience using Hello Interview, their YouTube channel is fantastic. I think it is the single best system design prep YouTube channel. But their paid offerings I have found not as good as interviewing.io. That's my personal opinion. And then the other that I would call out is Formation. I think it's formation.dev. It's a fellowship, and you get unlimited practice interviews of a variety of kinds, from behavioral to system design to coding. This is a really, it's going to be expensive. It's a really, really nice tool. If you are one of these other privileged individuals that has time, has money, and you're trying to crack FANG, that's going to be a really cool tool there. Oh, interviewing.io also has, I believe, free mock interviews with your peers. So you can do the paid ones with the FANG engineers, or you can do free ones with your peers. You can also drop by laterally.io, join the Discord, and often there's someone who will do a free mock interview, like a peer sort of interview there.
Yeah. And John, we were talking about this a little before the stream, and there are some strategies for doing a lot of self-study. So one of the things that I've been doing is having conversations with an LLM. So for example, if I have an interview loop, I'll ask at the beginning of the loop from the recruiter or the first point of contact, I'll ask them, hey, what does the technology stack, what does that look like at this company? What does the landscape look like? And I will get some keywords for me to search up after. Then what I'll do is, for example, if one of the key terms is TypeScript and AWS, I will go to an LLM, whatever it might be, a Mistral, a Claude, a GPT, whatever that is. I'll go and I'll ask, what are some interview questions? I will use a Risen framework, by the way. I'll say, as an expert software engineer interviewer, what would you give me 10 questions related to TypeScript and AWS for a technical interview? I'll get some questions, and that's my starting point. And then I'll continue the conversation from there. And John, you mentioned you have a specific way of doing this as well. And I want to touch upon maybe a way to do interview prep like for free is probably using this feature. What would you say to this?
It's a great point. Yeah. And while we're talking about frameworks, I'll just quickly mention for system design, there's the reshaded framework, which I quite like. For behavioral interviews, there's of course the STAR method, which is really solid. And there is the engineering method for LeetCode style coding rounds. So these are a few frameworks. Laterally also has the Laterally LeetCode Kata, which will give you a list of LeetCode problems that will help you get good at LeetCode. So these are a few frameworks to quickly mention. Circling back to the LLM approach, this is one of two approaches that I do recommend. So one is going to be go to LeetCode.com. If you want to do the classic LeetCode thing, go to LeetCode.com, sort by frequency of problem, and just brute force problem types. And there's going to be basically like 5 to 23 patterns that you'll be looking at. There's a diminishing marginal benefit, so that a lot of people are going to cut off around 10 patterns, and that's fine. That'll take care of over 80% of the interview questions you'll be asked. But what is the LeetCode.com for behavioral questions? There really isn't one, right? Not to my knowledge. So for behavioral interviews, we can leverage real interviews for practice, mock interviews for practice, and here's a third option, which is it's almost totally free, because I am going to recommend using ChatGPT Premium, one of these paid models. O1 Preview performs significantly better than 3.5, for instance. And that is that you can have a mock interview with a language model. And my favorite will be the O1 Preview model at the current time, at the time of this recording. That will certainly change over time. So the LIMSYS leaderboard is going to be your power tool to figure out what is the best model for practice interview at any point in time for the foreseeable future. There's a leaderboard that ranks the general performance of these models. And why do I like O1 Preview so much? Not only is it the top of the leaderboard, and it can execute basic machine reasoning, which is different than plain token prediction. So it's actually a fundamentally different model. It also has voice mode, and voice mode is going to be a small difference that makes a big difference. So on the phone, I believe it's currently only available on the phone version of ChatGPT. I don't think you can get it on the web yet. Ask it to come up with one of these behavioral questions randomly generated, and then try to answer it using your voice, speaking out loud. And this will help you sharpen the way that you deliver your behavioral answer. Do this under time pressure. So ideally you have a timer going, and that timer will be calibrated to whatever interview you're coming up against. Different companies will give you different lengths of time to answer. I think a good rule of thumb is that you can give a behavioral answer in under 5 minutes. It's just a rule of thumb. And then often the interviewer will dig in. And so you'll want to be able to anticipate questions and expand your answer for another 5 to 10 minutes. But usually you can give that first pass of an answer within 5 minutes. As I mentioned earlier, we want to use the STAR method. I like to add an additional R, a reflection step after your result step. So what would I have done differently if I could? This allows you to give a more senior signal than you would if you just gave the plain facts. Yeah, and otherwise we're just going to be nailing that STAR method and making sure that the result is relatively impressive. And I do like to emphasize, why was this story difficult? So Amazon is famous for the STAR method. Facebook has something called the SOAR method, where you go through the situation and the obstacle. I do a hybrid. When I go through the STAR method, when I talk about my action, I'm driving home why I took this action, what problem it was solving, and why that problem was a big problem. Just emphasize that it was a big problem for some reason, and that makes the story overall more impressive. So you should have like a Google Doc or something, some list of these stories that you've sort of prepared. Then when you receive the question, it's just a matter of picking the right story to answer that question. And this is where practice is going to help you nail this. It'll take a while, but after a while, it becomes a relatively straightforward round type.
Yeah. And another thing that I've noticed that's worked really well is I've gone through an AI interview loop. And if you have any experience in this, I'd love to know your thoughts in the chat. Tell me if y'all like it or any other thoughts you have. But essentially, I went through an AI interview loop that gave me some really good critical feedback. It said there were times where I was being cyclical, where I was repeating myself. And there were times when I was saying stuff that didn't build trust in the interview process. So if there's any way for you to use the voice feature of an LLM, like John's mentioned, and a prompt where at the end, the model, if you get it to give you some really critical feedback, I think that would be fantastic. Because in the moment, we think we gave a really good answer, but in retrospect, it may have not translated the way we wanted to. Another thing I would like to add is record yourself when you're doing this and play it back. Take a look at how you express your ideas. One of the things I've done as a content creator is I've shut off the visuals and listened to the audio. Is that clear? Okay, great. Now shut off the audio and look at the visuals. Do you look like a personable person? Are you like looking at the audience? Are you using the correct hand gestures? Things like that. So kind of introspecting on yourself is another way to improve your interview game. I want to also make a call out for the time. We are at 3/4 and there's 3 more topics I'd like to cover. Yeah, any thoughts on that, John, before we wrap up the getting interviews but not landing offers?
2 quick ones. One, I want to give a huge +1 to your call out to rewatch the visual. So your nonverbal cues are something that's going to help you really excel in interviews and that don't get enough attention, I think, when we talk about technical prep. Smile often. Smile often and give your interviewer compliments. I'm going to give you 2 concrete things here. If you make a mistake, and this happens often, you can recover from a mistake. Don't fear the mistake. Or if your interviewer gives you a hint, you might consider this a bad thing or not in the moment. Thank your interviewer regardless for a correction or for a hint. Do not apologize, because these are the sorts of signals that will stick in their brain. So if you type something wrong and the interviewer calls it out, you say, oh, thank you. That's exactly what I meant. Great point. They are going to remember your appreciative attitude, and this calibrates you well, rather than, oh, darn it, I didn't, I'm so mad. That looks bad for you. These things are actually weighed heavily at calibration time, and I think a lot of job seekers don't understand that. The second thing is when we do these language models, what do you prompt exactly? I'll give a quick tip for what I do there. I'll ask it to tell me whether it would pass me or fail me, give me a score on the scale of 1 to 10, tell me what it liked in my answer, what it didn't like in my answer, and what I could have done differently to get a better score. That's kind of my baseline. Often I will see that it gives me a rating higher than I really think I deserve. So then sometimes I will add another sentence, which is like, grade harshly and do not give me a score over 5 if you would pass me. So those are some of the things whenever you're talking to these language models, you can get some more useful feedback.
Yeah. And it's a matter of iterating on feedback, because for a while there, I would iterate on feedback from actual interviews, which is a great method of practice if you don't have to land a job. Like I still do that, where I'll just interview 3-4 times a month, and sometimes it goes somewhere, but even if it doesn't, you get the experience. Cool. So the next question is, now I'm getting these offers. I have held a few positions, but I feel like I got my wheels in the mud and I'm not progressing in my career. So a concrete example could be I'm stuck in this phase of, say, a senior software engineer. I know this is something where you might get that title once, and then you could be stuck in it for like the rest of your career. So how can we make sure that we're always moving forward and instead of just going sideways?
Love this. Okay, so I have a title of staff engineer, and I previously held a title of principal engineer. If you're going just off the title, this looks like a step down. Actually, it's not. And so I'll give you a 3-point mental model on growth, and you don't need to hit all of them. I would encourage you to try to get 2. Now, maybe you can only get 1. I guess that's doable. But you definitely don't need all 3. So advancement does not always look like a change in job title. You can hold senior for the rest of your career, and you can continue to see your compensation go up, actually. So the title, compensation are 2 means of growth, and the third would be the skill development. And so if you are not earning more and your title is the same, but if you're continuing to learn new technical skills, that's still setting you up for a positive move in the future. That's still growth. So these are the 3 points in growth that I like to see. Taro, jointaro.com. There's a fellow there, I believe it's Rahul is his name. And I think he recommends something like going after a 30% increase in comp. If comp is the main thing that you're going for, that represents a meaningful bump to him. Hope I'm getting that quote right. And then level or title, I would also include switching from IC to management. So that if you go from, say, senior developer to entry-level manager, this is still as long as it's a positive change in your estimation, then that's still growth. Oh, one other thing I like to add here. I don't encourage you to join a role where you have 0% of the subject matter and skill context. That's a dangerous situation to be in. We want to grow our skills, but we also want to make a quick impact. And so I recommend looking for a role where you have 50 to 80% of the skills and domain context, whether it's a fintech or whatever sort of technology sub-industry it is. So go to where 50 to 80% is familiar, and then you can grow the other 20 to 50%, whatever the difference is. That would be a recommendation there. I don't really recommend going the whole 0 to 1 thing. That's going to set you up for a really hard onboarding.
Yeah, I think there's a cross-cutting concern here as well that I want to bring some attention to. So John said that you want to be highly aligned with the jobs you're applying for, right? And I think this is really important to that first question, going back to, I'm not getting traction in the job market. I think, especially in this season, right, in 2024, you have the best chance of landing interviews if you are highly aligned with the job. So this is likely going to be more difficult if you're a new grad or looking to pivot in, which I still think there are some strategies that we can cover in a different live. But in a nutshell, you want to make sure that you have about 70 to 80%, as John mentioned, of overlap in the jobs you're applying for. Now, with the progressing in your career, one of the things that, or rather three of the things that have really helped me is the first one is if you feel like you're not progressing in your career, you should try getting some competing job offers and optimizing on either the compensation, as John mentioned, right? There's two ways, well, there's three ways to move up, right? But the main two are increase in title and increase in compensation. So see if you can land some multiple offers and max out on one of those to get to the next level. Another thing is going back to this idea of working for staffing companies. One of the great things that you can do through a staffing company is if you think you're going sideways, try reaching out to a staffing company and see if they have some kind of contract at a FANG, at some place like Amazon, OpenAI, something like that. And then once you do that contract, guess what? You add the client to your resume. You don't add tech systems, you add Microsoft, right? And then that's a great way to leapfrog to the next level. And the final thing here is that's worked really well with, in my case, and I'm sure John can also attest to this, is becoming a thought leader within your industry. So if you're a front-end software engineer, I want to see you posting stuff about you being opinionated on what good design should be, right? Like if you see, a great example is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a mess. If you see something meme worthy in LinkedIn, you should go implement like something better and do an A/B test. I have a client of mine a few years back. He did this same thing for Facebook or some site. And there were multiple business owners reaching out to him through his YouTube video, where all he did was show a left-hand side of the bad example and the right-hand side of him live coding a better solution. So things like that go a long way. Don't just say it, show it. Okay. What do we think? Did we answer that well? Is there anything we can expand on, John?
I think there's a lot more we could expand on, but I think we also got the basics there. You said the word meme worthy. I think one call out is something that I would have been unaware of even a couple of years ago is you can post a meme on LinkedIn these days, and it does relatively well. 10 years ago, this was considered like unprofessional or something, that LinkedIn, you would have to be dry and you would want to be very technical in your thought leadership. Now you can post a meme and get like 10,000 views. So go for it. Don't feel bad about joking. It doesn't make you look worse. That would be one small note that I'd make.
Yeah, definitely a good call out. Don't be too divisive with your memes, right? Find something that's relatable that unites people along a pain point or like something, just relatable. Okay, so we're going to go above time. Is that okay, John? You got time?
Yeah, I have I'm up to a whole hour before I have like another call or anything. Hopefully we don't go an hour over, but yeah, I have time.
No. Yeah, I don't expect it to go over an hour. I hope everyone has gotten some actionable feedback from this, some actionable thing to do. I hope not all of this.
If you haven't gotten something actionable, watch the video again, because we have been dropping lots of highly actionable steps.
Yeah, or if you think, hey, there's something missing, please point it out. Like if you want to challenge any of these views we're having, we encourage the debate. If you have data, if you have anecdotes that go against what we're saying, we'd love to see it. Okay, so yeah, please challenge these views that we have. Okay, so the next thing is, what are some extracurricular activities worth doing as someone who's working in tech? So what things can we do as engineers, as designers, as product people working in tech? What can we do outside of work that could have the potential of increasing the velocity or the development of our careers?
Yeah, the big one is open source, right? The big one is open source. And content creation, you can create content along just your hobbies. Maybe you're interested in cooking. I've seen like an uncanny correlation when it comes to career switchers. A lot of engineers come from the food industry. Music, just whatever's popular. If you have a hobby that you're passionate about, that would be a second best performer. The best one will just be making content about tech. But it is nice to see that we're multidimensional people. We have hobbies and we're not just coding all the time. But then there are employers that will be very happy if you are unidimensional and coding all the time.
Yeah, like here, the things that have really helped me, and John, I want to hear from you as well, if there's anything that's new to this list. But essentially, one of the things that's really helped me as a software engineer is getting better at writing well and often. So this idea of how can we talk about technical things, both to a technical audience as well as a more diverse one. So whenever, for the first 3 years or so, whenever I had a project, I would always think, what can I write about this? So a few years back, I had the chance to work in hospitality CRM, where I built a facial recognition lock. So just right there were like 5 or 6 articles. And I built this facial recognition lock system thing in 2018. So this is way before this whole computer vision and AI, boom, at least, in where the circles we're concerned in. So things like that, always think, hey, I'm building this thing. What am I learning? What are some of the things that's applicable to a wider audience? And the second thing is you should spend time on a side project, whatever it is. I think even as a designer, engineer, anybody working in tech, you should likely have some kind of side project that you can talk about. So, if you're in tech sales, think of something that's adjacent to tech sales, or like something that you could show to a potential employer that would drive home the fact that, hey, this person can understand things and relay it to other people in a intuitive and like informative way. Okay. And one of the final extracurricular activities that I engage in is always staying interviewed. I'm always like talking with decision makers. I'm always, doing something, right? Like just last week, I was in a conversation with the CEO and their like an operations manager on compliance and how like you can build compliance software out of LLMs. So it's just like stuff like that. Just always having that door open. Anything else
Yeah.
you'd like to add?
Here's as you were talking, I thought of another one. Actually, I'm wearing a shirt, Code and Lift. And so one thing we've kind of neglected during the stream, although it wasn't the topic of the stream, is just living a healthy lifestyle, which I think will improve your job search performance, and also it'll accelerate your career if you can maintain a healthy lifestyle. So exercising is going to be a great hobby there. We talked about cooking. That obviously plays a role in a healthy lifestyle. So I think exercise is another good one. This will not really help you grow your social media followers, but it will help you live a better life. And yeah, I would circle back to writing is going to be super crucial. Thank you for calling that out. It's something that has become second nature to me, so I sort of neglect it. But if you're doing social media, this will help you with writing of a kind, but maybe try emphasizing longer form writing, right? Because the way that we speak in a tweet is not the way that we speak in a blog article. By the way, Latterly.io, the standard curriculum, is project-based, and the project we encourage is a blog. So yes, I absolutely think that you should be blogging. And some of the reasons for that go along with everything that Dawn has been saying. It helps position you as a thought leader in tech. And then also there is the verbal and the nonverbal communication that we want to practice alongside the writing, right? So again, I think if you are doing social media content, maybe I should unpack this a little bit. Here I'm including both written and short form and video, okay? I think if you're doing these things, you're going to become a better speaker as well. But just to emphasize that, yes, speak and writing are going to help for sure.
Okay, so John, I got to ask you a question. should we talk about this whole lead code thing? There's been some drama on LinkedIn.
Sure. Yeah. Wherever there's drama, there's potential views, right? Let's take advantage of that.
Yeah. So okay. So let me lay it to you straight, right? No form of like, I'm not a fan of sugarcoating this kind of thing. So I see a lot on LinkedIn, these so-called experts who say you should say no to technical challenges and you should say no to, more specifically, these like lead code tests and brain teasers. What's your view on this?
So I'll give you two answers. The first answer is that the way that I view almost all decision making in the job search and in the career development process is through the lens of investment. And so my question with lead code is, how much time will it take? How much effort will it take? How much financial out-of-pocket cost will be involved? And what are the potential returns on this? And if I consider all of those things, does this beat just taking that money and putting it in an index fund? You know, is it in excess of 10%, say? And the answer is yes, particularly if you're interested in targeting a tier one company where the incomes are outsized. It's a fantastic return on investment. In fact, I would consider it table stakes to intentionally practice lead code style interviewing. That's the state of the situation today. The second answer that I'll give to the question, when someone says you should say no to lead code style interviews, my question would be why? Why? And there are some good answers here. But I think that if you have the person explain their reasoning, they will basically indicate that lead code is not a good mechanism of interview. It doesn't give you the best candidate signal. It's not really what the employer even wants to do. The employer may be unintentionally selecting for traits they don't realize, which may be counter traits. For example, we see that the highest performing competitive programmers actually do not do well in a team setting. This has been empirically noted. And so I think that these are basically all correct. These are basically all correct points. And so that if I could wave a magic wand, I would mostly do away with the lead code interview, or at least I would really downregulate the way that it's used in typical calibration today. But that is a really privileged opinion that does not apply to the typical engineer. And in fact, we're going to put a lot of people in harm's way if we give this as general advice that everyone should avoid lead code. I think the better frame here, my opinion, would be most people should be doing something like lead code. But if you're in a privileged position where you're able to shape the interview process itself, you should on that senior end of the spectrum, be working to downregulate or modify or kick out lead code. And in particular, as the staffified AI engineer, I'm going to predictably say this. In 2024 and beyond, we need to take seriously the ability to use a language model at interview time. And so what would I do instead of lead code? Maybe I would leave it, and then I would let the candidate use lead code alongside, or use a language model alongside. So this is an option. Maybe I would completely get rid of it and have a round which is dedicated to tool usage. Does this candidate know how to prompt a language model? Can they detect when the language model is hallucinating? When the language model fails, do they have alternative strategies like using Google or whatnot? And so this does start to look like a paired programming round, doesn't it? Where you're sitting with another engineer and they're just giving you a task, and then you're free to build some component or something like this. I think this is a really nice interview round. And there have been problems with this sort of round, which is that you get a hard to calibrate signal. So from the employer perspective, one of the things that's nice about lead code is that it's easy to grade. Depending on the job market, this will be a little bit flexible, but in the current job market, if you can't solve the problem, you fail. It's pretty clear. Now, I can tell you, as having run the SDE3 round at Amazon and gotten the right answers, that's not good enough. So you actually need to do better than get the right answer. But still, it's a pretty clear fail signal if you don't get the right answer. So it's easier to grade. My favorite approach, although it's hard, somewhat hard from the employer perspective to implement, but my favorite approach, I'll lay this out, is to have multiple round types and let the candidate choose. And this will enable the employer to access more diverse talent. So there are real efficiency gains from the employer, although it's a higher lift. And so you might say, if you would like to do a project-based interview, you can. If you'd like to do a lead code style interview, you can. If you'd like to do one of these pair programming rounds, you can. And this allows the job seeker to show their best self And as the employer, you'll access more diverse talent this way. So that's what I would like to do, but I've really only seen that done at like 1 or 2 companies.
Yeah, I think it's worth noting what these technical rounds could consist of. And it's essentially, it could be a pair programming session, a whiteboarding session where you and an interviewer go through a lead code problem. It could be project-based, where it could be a take-home challenge or a project-based challenge that you implement live with an audience. And finally, it could be a technical Q&A, where you are given some kind of problem and you work through some solution verbally. Okay. Now, based on these things, right? The way I look at it is just as John said: is what is the economic benefit of doing this, right? Like, what's the cost benefit analysis? By being comfortable with lead code, you open up tier 1. By being comfortable with lead code, you even open up tier 2, which, monkey see, monkey do. They're doing lead code just like, Amazon and whoever else in Fang. So my advice would be to stay practiced. Stay practiced in the sense there are at least 5 or 6 free lead code platforms that you could use to just up your game. And part of software engineering, and this I'm going to single out software engineers here, is you're only as good as your skills, right? Like, to talk about, to make a Sopranos reference, you're only as good as the last envelope, So from that perspective, you got to always improve your skills. And I would say for those of you who are afraid of lead code, it is because of a lack of practice. Once you go through 20, 30 questions, you're going to start seeing a lot of commonality, and you're going to start seeing a lot of strategies, cross-cutting strategies that could be used to solve a lot of these problems, right? It's a lack of practice, I think, mainly. If you're afraid of lead code, don't get into the echo chamber of trying to change the interview process where you say, oh, I don't want to do a technical challenge.
Let me add,
the second you say,
let me add a note
yeah.
here. So I think you're right
Yeah.
about a lack of practice. I also think there's 2 other problems that people face. One is mixed guidance on how to approach technical problems. And 2 is the startup energy problem, where many of the canonical lists that we use, including the Blind 75 or the Neat Code 150, are contrary to what you've just advised. And I think you're right, Don, that 20 or 30 problems is good enough. Instead, they will see 75 or 150, and there's this really high, like a large number of problems. If I got laid off yesterday, do I need to do 80 lead code problems before I apply somewhere? Like, this is not the right thing to do. I'll also say, not to bag on Neat Code, I love the guy. But the first few problems in there, like the way that he sets up a linked list using a 2-entity linked list pattern that looks very much like a Java architecture. This is like not the typical way you implement a linked list in a Python problem. You would just use a single entity. So again, you get mixed answers and you get a high like startup energy requirement. And I've done what I can to address this directly. And so the Latterly Leak Code kata has a basic form and an extended form. And the extended form is 20 problems. The basic form is 12 problems. And this is an evidence-based kata. What does kata mean? A kata is an exercise that you do over and over. And so this is an opinionated solution to how do we practice. Some people will say you should not memorize, you should learn patterns. The truth is that learning the pattern is a step after learning the solution. So you abstract a pattern by learning multiple similar concretes. So you need to start by learning one of those concretes. So I'll do 2-sum and 3-sum, and you'll be able to understand why 3-sum is similar to 2-sum. Now you're abstracting. Does that make sense? And if you can look at this from the pattern perspective, there are only like 5 or 10 patterns that account for more than 80% of the leak code questions that you're likely to get. And so I definitely think this is a worthwhile investment. Again, going back to the investment frame, the extended one is optional. The basic one is going to be really high ROI. As Don said, even in tier 2 and tier 3, you'll get a significant advantage in your coding rounds, even in those lower tiers. And it's basically table stakes in tier 1. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to give some actionable things that y'all can do. So the first thing I think is getting comfortable with some kind of TDD setup, test-driven development setup in your language of choice. So I'm going to pick on JavaScript here. You can do TDD in more ways than you think. If you open up an inspector window and you go into the console, that's TDD, because you can call functions and you can write some code in that REPL, right? Like in here, actually, let me share my screen. So if I just go here and I go into the console, this is doing some test-driven development. Like I can copy paste function bodies into this and run. So the point here is you need to be comfortable with TDD. What does that really mean? That means you need to be able to create some kind of local environment where you can write some kind of test and call your code. I think that's the first step, is being comfortable with TDD. Next, go into Laterally and take a look at that kata practice. The first step, some of the steps in there is recite the problem, write pseudocode. I think that's very important, because people jumping right into lead code, they think in terms of actual runnable code. You don't necessarily want to think like that as a beginner. You want to think in terms of pseudocode. You need to recite the problem and pose the problem first, right? And then from there, you'd want to start your solution. Just having a process that works for you is something that you can only figure out by just doing. You've got to practice.
I dig it. Anything else? Anything else to cover today?
Yeah, I think that was it, right? Like those were the topics.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Don.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And we will do another one on, I think we should likely do another one in a few weeks. We got that thing going. We'll come back. We'll get back to you with something. But in the meantime, yeah, keep doing what you're doing and keep on trudging along. Yeah. I don't have a sign off for this. But yeah, anything else you want to plug in at the end here, John?
No, I mean, I have my TikTok. There's like over 20,000 people that follow me there. There's the YouTube channel where I do live coding often, and these streams are saved to YouTube. So that could be worth checking out. I've already talked about Laterally. That's cool. There's also a Discord where you can come chat, and there is a Laterally custom GPT. So you can get like 24/7, and it's free. So you get like 24/7 support that way. It's not quite PhD level, despite what they say. But it's there. It's better than nothing, I guess. So I guess those would be some things that I call out.
Yeah. Nice. So yeah, we have a lot of content here. Probably going to repost this for those of you who missed it. And yeah, until next